Manhattan. My name is Peter Thompson, and I'm joined by my colleague, the Reverend Zach Niane, our Senior Associate Rector. And together, we would like to welcome you to the forum where each week we have sacred conversations about the things that matter. Whether you're joining us online at stbarts.org or here in person on Park Avenue, we are so glad that you are here. And we are very pleased to welcome this morning, on our first Sunday of Advent, Matthew LaBanca, who is the writer and star of the new Off-Broadway production Communion, which is currently playing at the Cell Theater in Chelsea. It's an autobiographical work about his experience of being fired from a Roman Catholic church and school after marrying someone of the same gender. Matthew, it is so great to have you here. Thank you for sharing this work and your experience with us.
It's my pleasure to be here, and thank you so much for. We've been running for about a month, and we close this Sunday. But Peter and Zach have both come to see the show, so thank you for your support.
We have indeed, and loved it.
It was such a joy to go downtown a little ways to the Cell Theater and get to see the play in person, which we encourage you all to do while it's still playing. But just to start off, why did you choose to write this play about your experience?
So well, first, my name is Matthew LaBanca. I'm an actor and a writer and a teacher and a musician. And I've lived in New York for about 25, 30 years, and I've had a career on Broadway and around the country as a performing artist. But I also, as any artist knows, you have to pay the rent. And when I was in college, I also studied to be a music teacher. And I come from a whole family of educators, and that turned out to be some of my solvency work as an educator. But I also grew up in the Catholic Church, and I come from not only a family of teachers, but my father is also a music teacher. And we just grew up playing instruments and singing, and it was just a natural fit for me that I was playing the organ and leading the choirs in my church where I grew up as a teenager, and then at my college church at University of Connecticut, and then again here in New York City. So when you ask why did I decide to write and tell this story, it's because there have been so many parts of my life that have converged into telling this story. And I think that as an actor in the theater for as long as I've been working, I just kind of see the world in stories. And I felt that this was a very important story to tell.
It's so wonderful during the play, without giving too much up, you get kind of immersed into Matthew's classroom, and he has the whole audience singing and interacting and participating together, and your spirit of joy and curiosity is so evident, even with the audience as you get us up singing. So again, go see the play, and you'll get to experience what it's like to have Matthew as a teacher. But with all of these different convergences coming together in the play, did you learn anything new about yourself during the process of putting it on?
Oh my goodness. Well, I learned that I'm a good writer, at the risk of not sounding humble, but I feel that that's really developed. And I learned that, well, just in a nutshell, like what the play is about. I worked for years as a music teacher and as a musician in the Diocese of Brooklyn here in New York. And when the diocese, happened in 2021, during COVID actually, when the Diocese of Brooklyn learned, this is my husband Rowan, by the way, he's right up here, and that we had gotten married. Someone from one of the communities I taught at the school 7 blocks from my house, and then at the church on the weekends I played. And when they found out that we were married, I was fired from both positions simultaneously on the same day. And they offered me money to keep quiet about everything, like a typical corporate agreement. It was a severance package that was 10 pages, 11 pages long, and had a typical non-disclosure, non-disparagement agreement. And I turned them down, and I wrote a play instead. So I learned that I could do that. I learned how important using your voice is, how important it is not just for myself, but for for other people who don't have the skills to share or don't want to share. I feel as though, I was a voice at first for myself. It's very cathartic to do this, but actors do that all the time. But I also have found that it's quite an act of service for other people who this story is much more common than I realized, so I learned that as well. A lot of people have come out of the woodwork and said to me, this happened to me. This happened to me and my husband, or to me and my wife. And thank you so much for sharing the story, because it's my story. So yeah, I learned all about that as well, that there's a wider need for what I call a theatrical ministry.
Mm. I wonder, Matthew, if you can tell us a little bit about the title of the play, Communion. It's such an evocative, sacramental title. I wonder why you picked it and what the significance of the title is for you.
That's the benefit of being married to a screenwriter, that he's wonderful with titles, and I think some of that has rubbed off on me. The title did come from me, but it does evoke a lot of things. Obviously, it's a sacramental evocation, but it's also the idea that when you teach, and when you teach music, and when you lead a choir, and when you're in a parish, there are opportunities to commune with people. And I teach elementary music, so you see, there's less barrier there, and it's one of the joys of teaching at that age level. And we wanted in the play to bring people together at a time. Yes, the theater naturally does that, but I'm sure so many people who are here today, but also watching online, in the comfort of your own space, there's a real sense of, for better or worse, isolation that is, blanketing our world and our city right now. And to get people to come out, as I'm sure being church leaders, what that is and how that's changed. And when you are in a theater together, there's just a magical alchemy that happens. And when you're in a choir together, there's a magical alchemy that happens. So we do both in our show. And I had some hesitancy about that at first. My director, her name is Kira Simring. She's the artistic director of the Cell Theater, where our show takes place on 23rd Street between 8th and 9th. And she said, I want a big sing-along. I said, are you sure people are going to sing? She said, just trust. Just trust. Have faith, she said. Have faith. Have faith. And we did it, and I realized that asking theater people in New York to sing wasn't that big of a stretch.
I wonder, Matthew, what your relationship with the church is like now. You mentioned the church has been part of your life from the beginning. You talk in the play about being a minister and reckoning with that identity, as complicated as that is for the storyline. And then the church did this tremendous act of violence to you. How do you make sense of that, and what is your relationship to the church and to God like now?
My relationship to God has never been rocked. That's not been in question. And like one of the lines in the play says, that the church isn't God. But I will admit that I'm at a loss right now. I do feel a little bit lost. Today's the first Sunday of Advent, right? And, I thought about wearing purple today. And I've thought this weekend too, because as the show only has another week of its run, and I often look to the theater as a bit of a church, because it is a gathering of people, and it is where people are moved and where the Spirit is felt. And I know a lot of people feel that way. You can find church in a lot of places, and so thankfully I've been finding that. But that traditional sense is always a comfort to me, especially at a time of year where you do want to reflect, and you do want that scaffolding around you, and you do want a community around you of like-minded people. So I do miss that a little bit. I feel a little like an orphan, and I have come around to different churches, and um, yeah, it's very it's a scar that does not go away when something like this happens. Um, I would imagine that, well, I can speak in my own family, like my older brother, who's straight, cisgendered, a couple of years older than I am, has a traditional family. Um, he's very traditional, my brother, and he left the Catholic Church as a result of this. I mean, we're a tight Italian family, so you stick together too. There's a lot of that going on, but my parents grew up. They're New York City children, and they moved up to Connecticut, and that's where we were raised. But you know, I used to sub around the Diocese of Brooklyn doing weddings and such. And there was this one All Souls Day Mass I was playing, and I looked at the church. I said, "This looks so familiar." And I called my parents and I said, um, "Did you get married at St. Benedict Joseph LeBray in Richmond Hill?" They said, "Yes." I said, "I'm here right now. That's your wedding picture." So like roots are there, and they don't go to church. Sorry, this is moving to me, but they don't go to church anymore. And like my mom taught nursery school in that Catholic church. My father led the music there and the choir. And, you know, they're in their late 70s now, and community is very, very important. My mom still will do Catholic Daughters, right? Or Rosary Altar. But these things, like a decision like this, doesn't just affect the person, it affects an entire community of people. And one of the reasons that I wrote this piece was to inspire people in positions of religious authority to reconsider the pain that's inflicted at the hands of religious discrimination, and not just to the person who they think is making a choice about their life, because gay people don't choose to be gay no more than straight people choose to be straight. It's just who you are, and it's how God makes you. And it deserves to go hand in hand with the rest of God's design for you, that you're put on this earth to make manifest and do all the wonderful things that God has in store for you. And that includes the joy of loving and of being loved.
Matthew, as someone so thoroughly entrenched in the Catholic Church, together with your family, how have you coped with this whole story? And, how have you worked through the anger and the pain that the church has inflicted upon you?
So actors can be a little weird that way, but like I live it each time with not only with the performance, but also with the writing of it. One of the things that happened when I was let go, I had kind of a clue from a fellow staff member that something might be happening, and then sure enough it did happen. So I had my phone with me, and I clicked record, and I just put it on the table. There were two meetings. One where I was called in to say, there's a committee discussing this. And then the second, a month later, where they officially did fire me. And the phone recording that I had, and New York is a one-party consent state, so you can do that sort of thing. And I listened to it, and I would transcribe it later. I'm like, maybe I need to find some sort of legal workaround. It's very difficult at this point with the current, administration coming in and the Supreme Court and all of those things. I had a lawyer for a while, but, the coping comes from the fact that I can express it artistically. Like I said before, this has happened to other people. They cannot necessarily pursue a legal route successfully, really, but I have communion.
Mm. Well, back to the sacramental nature of communion, essentially sacraments make visible that which is invisible.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the issues that your play brings up is that of hypocrisy.
Mm-hmm.
And the reality that, of course, the Catholic Church does and always has had LGBTQ plus people in it, including priests. There's one particularly vivid scene where you talk about going to play the piano at a retreat of gay Catholic priests. And I'd love to hear more about that offline. But,
I don't know,
or
it sounds like
online if
people
you'd
might want to hear about that, but
we'll protect the innocent and those who don't want to. But you know, why do you think it is that the Catholic Church is still so hypocritical in your view, particularly when it comes to sexuality? I mean, in the play, you at one point say, well, what about all the Catholics on birth control? And what about all the Catholics that are pro-choice, etc.? Why is this issue still such a sticking point?
right. I want to tread lightly with this question only because I'm not like a biblical scholar or anything. It's just a story of what happened to me and the emotional journey of what a person goes through. But my own opinion, my own take on it is that there's a lot of internalized shame. People don't want to upset their mother. There's a lot of that. And it's also a safe place, you know, when society will condemn you. Oh, well, here's a place where that won't happen, even though at this point, you know, there's been so much scandal that rocks the Catholic Church. But I also want to, you know, I want to address the idea when you use the word hypocrisy, and we explore this in the play as well, that it's not just the hypocrisy of the church, but it's my own hypocrisy, you know, that when you say you have a choice, it was a choice for me to stay there. It was a choice for me to continue working there. Granted, there were a lot of benefits. You know, it was a job, a solvency job in my neighborhood that I could walk to. You cannot put a price on that. They gave me a parking spot. They gave me a pension. They gave me children when we don't have children of our own, and I'd always dreamed of being a father. And then suddenly, you know, hundreds of students are landing in my life. And it was a natural fit. And I stayed. I wasn't in the closet. I also say I didn't drape a pride flag over the organ where I played, you know. But I wasn't in the closet, and Rowan would come to like the Mardi Gras parties and would come to Christmas parties and the show and bingo night, and you know, we would do all that together. This came from the hierarchy of the church. I also know that it's very, very slow moving. And I also know that the committee that met to determine the fate of my employment, they met for almost 6 weeks, which was something really unheard of. Because typically when these decisions come down, it's a very quick and ruthless decision. And, you know, a woman gets pregnant out of wedlock and they're going to come and just, or in my case, you know, these things happen. And in this case, it did not happen like that. There were vicars and auxiliary bishops and lawyers, like they were all trying to figure out a way to circumvent what they call the ministerial exception. Now, granted, just because you have religious liberty doesn't mean that you have to exercise it, because you don't have to. But in the end, it was Bishop DiMarzio who made that ultimate decision. And it was a heightened sense of pain because he only had like 4 weeks left of his tenure. And he decided to do that anyhow. Their rationale was your offense was made public. And like I say in the show, my wedding was not an offense.
Matthew, I was fortunate enough to see the play twice. First in a kind of special preview production, and I was surrounded by folks from all sorts of mostly religious backgrounds who had come to see the play, and it was fascinating to hear some of their perceptions and experiences. What have you heard from all the different religious groups, like parishioners from St. Bart's, about the play and what it's meant to them?
It is funny, and not to like, you know, put people in a box, because everybody's experience is going to be different, but I often find that, like, my director is Jewish. she said, "Don't you want some fabulous gay Christian to direct this?" And I said, "No." I said, "I trust your judgment." And she's so wonderful with developmental works. And it was her idea to have the audience as a choir, right? And so people from her synagogue have come, and her parents and relatives have come, and they are like all fired up with justice, with this justice, justice, thou shalt pursue, right? And they really believe in questioning and asking questions, and the play really does that and puts that all out on the table. Like, why are we doing this? And I've had a lot of people from teachers that I worked with and parishioners come, and they're overwhelmed with a sense of burden and guilt that because I found that in the laity of the church, like in my story, but also like when I did research of like Pew Research polls, like the Catholic laity was always 2 steps ahead of the average individual in terms of inclusivity and loving one another. So this never came from the laity, and they really feel my pain. They're very empathetic and also have a guilt, and they're torn, and I really feel for them too, because, they have roots. And what do? I have some friends who have left the church, some friends who have kept their children in the Catholic school, and it's not so cut and dry, and I know this, which is why I have invited, and for anyone who's listening, I have invited clergymen and bishops and anyone in the Catholic Church to come as my guest to the show and bear witness to the emotional fallout that happens. Because, like I said before, just because you have this religious liberty doesn't mean that you have to exercise it. There was just a synod within the Catholic Church of the laity basically saying, how are we doing as a church? Are we journeying together? And what a wonderful manifestation of God's love if we could, allow for the love that He placed in our hearts already.
There's a really there's several sweet moments in the play in which you're talking with a choir member. I don't know whether it's one specific choir member
Yes.
or an amalgamation of a few of them.
Yeah.
Who's super supportive. And I wonder if that person, in the play, they went to see your other one-act play.
Yes.
Has that person come to see the play, and what has their reaction been like?
Yes, a lot of my choir has come, and, super supportive and great. So yes. And also, I embody about like 9 or 10 different characters throughout the play, including myself. And one of those characters that I embody is the principal at my school, who I made a video. I made a video when all this happened, because when you live in the community where you work, and you can't walk a block without somebody saying, "Hi, Matthew. Hi, how are you? Hi, Mr. LaBanca." And then you're asked to keep quiet about everything. I said, I'm just going to say it one time, because this story affects about 1,000 people between the parishioners and the families and my students and my coworkers. And that video that I made and put on YouTube, where I name my principal as my advocate, who was my fiercest advocate, which is why they wanted the 6 weeks to talk. I name him as such. And then it went viral, which is a big reason why we had all the media. We were covered in the New York Times. We were covered on Inside Edition. And the way the storytelling happens, there's a big media fallout that happens. Our projection designer was incredible. We have a sound designer to deal with characters that appear in voice only on a phone call. But my principal, I embody him as well. And the principal came to see the show. And I think is coming back again. So if that's a testament of how they felt, that's a good thing. I don't want this piece, and I really believe we struck a good tone with it. It is not about pointing fingers. It is not about casting blame, because nothing ever happens. People can, sense. That's the Martin Luther King quote, that wonderful quote, that you have no morally persuasive power with anyone who can feel your underlying contempt. And it cannot be about anger or hate or hurt or casting blame. It is about factual things that happened, And it is about an emotional life that ensues as a result of those choices. And what better way to do it than in a theatrical setting to bring about an emotional life and to share what happened? Because I believe that actors and writers, in whatever form they take, whether you're writing a homily or making a speech or teaching and putting on your, whatever it is, it's the actors and the writers of the world that I do believe lead the change for shifting hearts and minds, hopefully for the better.
There's another poignant character you embody. It's a former student that you encounter towards the end of his high school years, just as you're getting fired, and you realize that he's probably gay.
Yes.
And there's a sense in which you feel a kind of duty to do the right thing for him. I wonder if you can talk about that character.
It's one of the biggest reasons why we have the show, because it's all about the children and the next generation and what they're inheriting. And when you teach elementary age students especially, one of the joys of that is that you, and especially living in the neighborhood where I live, you get to see them mature and grow, but you know what was always inside them. And the prototype character, his name is David, so that we can have a line about David and Goliath later on. That's why I named him. That's why I named him David. I did not have a student named David, and he is an amalgamation of a lot of students that I had, obviously to protect your young as well, right? But there was a moment where on the day that I was fired, I ran into a student who I believe was straight, right? But he had on his red sweater, coming from senior pictures from the Catholic high school down the street. Here I was with like my box of things. Mr. LaBanca, how are you? I said, oh, how are you? And we shook hands, and he just told me where he was coming from. And that character aligned with another character who showed like a very vocal moment of support on the sidewalk in my neighborhood. And then some other other students that I had it's like your antenna go up. Like gaydar is a real thing, right? So like your antenna go up and like, oh, okay, all right. I have a feeling that I know how you'll mature, right? And you just teach your students as you would always teach them. It's nothing like that, but just, your instinct. And you think about, now that this has happened to me, the idea of a Catholic elementary school and a Catholic high school and then a Catholic college, and that there's this path that students take, and it's not necessarily their choice to take this path because they're raised like I was. I didn't go to Catholic school, but I went to CCD, and I was raised in a Catholic family, and my life embodied the Catholic world. It was my solvency work, and it was a natural fit. So in a way, that was me too, and that wasn't necessarily my choice. It was an indoctrination, again, for better and for worse. And in my case, I had to deal with picking up the pieces on my own without a community, a spiritual community around me, the one that I knew, the one that I grew up with. And that is what the scar really is, because you think this monumental thing happened. Like, I'm sure you've had parishioners that come to you and say, I just lost my job. Can you hold my hand, through this chapter? I did not have that. My parents did not have that. Where do you go? So it's been a struggle, and with a child, which is why we have that child character, with a child that goes through that you're inflicting for gay. A child who's going to identify as LGBTQ+, a lot more on them than you anticipate. And there's a culpability there that I think needs to be addressed.
So we have plenty of time for your questions. If you're here in the room, you can raise your hand, and Stephanie Terrell will come around with question cards for you. You can fill that out, and they'll be brought up to us. If you're joining us online, you can enter your question into the live chat on YouTube, the comments on Facebook, or you can email me, pthompson@stbarts.org. Email also works if you're here in the room. While we're waiting, I think you have a few more.
Sure. Well, I wonder, Matthew, personally, would you consider or entertain the idea of going back if things change and they asked you, or is that an ex-lover that needs to stay in the past?
Uh, I love the way you phrased that. Of course I would. And people might think, but what is forgiveness about? And what is atonement about? You know, individuals atone, but institutions can atone. I mean, I'm not familiar with the Episcopal Church, but I know that there's a lot of parallels, aren't there? And I don't know about the structure of the Mass, but in a Catholic Mass, it starts with the Confiteor prayer. You know, I confess, and it's the denial and then the acceptance that's prevalent in so many spiritual and religious traditions, where I deny the presence of the negative attributes that I brought into my life, my sin, right? I deny that presence over me, and I'm going to allow for the presence of God. And then you go into the Gloria, right? The glory to God, and I will praise this instead of choosing that. And, you know, an institution can say, you know what, we messed up and we got this wrong, and changes have been made in the Catholic Church in the past. Granted, over centuries, divorce was never a thing, annulments were never a thing, convalidations were never a thing. And women in the church were never, like even to have girls as altar servers, that was never a thing when I was growing up, but that has become a thing. So acceptance can change, and obviously there are other Christian faiths, other Bible-based faiths that are that have found their way on this issue. So yes, if there was something, some level of atonement and apology and introduction, then yes.
A fitting message for the first Sunday of Advent. When we start talking about repentance and return, and indeed we'll begin with the penitential rites at our 11 o'clock service. Well, we have some questions coming in.
I'll go first.
Okay.
Were there any protests by students, parents, or fellow parishioners about you being terminated?
There was a beautiful gesture of support. We were still in COVID at the time. This was 2021. And one of my younger choir members, she was in college at the time, said, let's all wear rainbow masks and come to Mass. Let's invite Matthew back.
I don't want to give too much away, but there's a photo of that in the.
Yeah, and we did.
Yeah.
And we did. And the pastor was nowhere to be found. Oh, I don't want to protest, he said. I don't want to protest. And this was never going to be a protest. It was just a gesture of support. And wasn't that clever? So we did that.
You know, nowadays in the Episcopal Church, sometimes we joke, but there are actually children who will grow up for years in the church and then encounter their first male priest and say to their parents, oh, I didn't know a priest can be a man, but this person, and in certain Episcopal churches, you might not know that priests could be straight, but this audience member asks, as an Episcopalian, I'm always disappointed more Roman Catholics don't find their way to us. Any thoughts about this?
I knew that was going to be a question.
That's a great question. And you're so siloed. You're so in your lane. I don't think that it's even a consideration. You know, like I said that line before, Mom will get very upset. You're supposed to be baptized in communion and confirmed so you can get married in the church. So I think that's what a lot of that is about. Tradition is very prevalent and it's very powerful.
I have a question from someone who identifies as a gay actor and wants to write his own screenplay. Any advice to others like you who want to tell their story?
Don't stay alone. Don't stay alone. And if you are, if you want to write it, just write and join us. I joined a Shut Up and Write group. Are you familiar with those? They're online communities. And it's called Shut Up and Write. And you show up Some of them happen in person. They're all around the city, all around the country, I believe. My brother was doing something for like some traditional Italian recipes for a cookbook. I did it for my play. And Rowan would be like, "Oh my gosh, he would like leave for work in the day, and my group would start at like 9:30 and would go for like an hour and a half or something. You turn it on mute and you just write or you're typing, and before you know it, then you have like 10 minutes left. Do something like that. Do and find your creative team. You know, find a cinematographer if it's a screenplay. Find a co-writer. Find a director. Develop it with somebody, so it's not just you, because it's very easy to stay by yourself." Yeah.
This person asks, do you think that you would still be dismissed today, or do you feel like even since you were dismissed, there has been a softer acceptance of same-sex marriage in the Catholic Church, and specifically your parish and diocese?
I think it's really a case-by-case basis. It's very tricky to know. And, you know, Bishop Brennan is the bishop now, and I just get a softer vibe from him. But I also know that there was a young teacher in Rockville Center on the South Shore of Long Island. Michael Califano is his name, and he was fired last Christmas. He grew up in that parish. It was a very sad story, and he was like in his mid-20s, so it affects you differently. He was let go. I met last night a woman in Detroit. Her story was in the New York Times as well. She had been let go. Now, I don't know, you know, every parish is different. Like, and if you're going to be with the Jesuits or the Franciscans, like there are some very gay-affirming Catholic churches right here in New York City. St. Peter, St. Paul, and St. Francis of Assisi. So if you're someplace like that, they're like, their choir was waving rainbow flags in June. Like, I went, like, it was incredible. So that's not an easy answer.
You had a career in Broadway, Matthew.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if you, alongside your teaching, I'm wondering if you can talk about what it was like having been in Broadway musicals on national tours, etc., to then be in a play about your own life.
Yes. So I got my career start, and a lot of my bread and butter as an actor was as a song and dance man. I used to wear a big old hairpiece to be a leading man, and for years, I was a tap dancer. I did a lot of like the Gene Kelly, Fred Astaire stuff, and I loved it. I made my Broadway debut with the Mel Brooks musical Young Frankenstein. I was in the original company of that. I covered the Gene Wilder part. I went on for that role in previews and have since done several Broadway shows. And the most recent show that I did was A Christmas Carol at the Lyceum Theater in 2019. And that show was not so much the Cole Porter Gershwin song and dance musical that I had done. That was more, there was music in it, but it was more of a play, and I played instruments in there. And between that and some acting training that I've been doing over the last 10 years, like it shifted. So instead of being more of an entertainer, singer, song and dance man type medium that I was attracted to, I was much more attracted to work that shifted the heart. A Christmas Carol definitely did that. It was one of the most beautiful productions I'd ever been a part of. Involved the audience, community building. I think it really affected my writing and the aesthetic of communion. And you know, I used to not be satisfied if I wasn't doing a kickball change in a musical, and now I'm mostly satisfied if I make a connection with an audience member because of words that I have spoken.
You already referenced your line about the theater being your church.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering if you might tease out the comparison between the theater and the church a little more.
Yeah. It's a place where people gather. It's an auditorium. It's a place where people focus and listen and oftentimes go inward. And, you know, they say a doctor will fix a broken bone and an actor can fix a broken heart. And that's I think, something that is really beautiful about this piece and just the theater in general. So I often encourage, because you're not just by yourself, you can feel like you're, but then there's other people going through it too. And at a time when so often we feel like this, isolated. That's one of the reasons why I'm so proud of this piece.
In that regard, what would you say the church can actually learn from the theater?
Oh. Come out wherever you are. Um, that, that it's, that being like, you can look at being an actor in the theater as like, I want to put on the skin of somebody else. I want to become someone else. But I have learned as an actor and training as a performer that it's the place where you are the most yourself. It's the place where, yeah, you're maybe speaking someone else's words, and maybe you're put on another costume, or you have an impediment, you're walking, or whatever. But the heart of what you're saying and where it lives in you and the instincts that come out of you, it's where you're given permission to be yourself the most. And where else are you known better than in a relationship with the divine? And to me, like, a theatrical experience can be a beautiful divine experience for people. And to allow that in a church setting where you're emotionally alive and you feel the Spirit. You know, Catholics are often taught to, you know, right, all of that. And you're just, I won't necessarily sing out Louise, but you can, and you know, everybody's style is different, and I understand that. Some people are more extroverted and more introverted, but there's just a wonderful acceptance that I have found in the theater, and to have that acceptance for better, for worse, for your fullness of who your humanity is, for the way that God made you, that church can be that place as well. Wow, that's just like, to have that level of acceptance. I mean, you're going to church to confess your, like to your, you know. So yeah, I think that parallel and that light that can be shown is a wonderful parallel and could be learned from the theater.
In addition to being an actor, you're also a teacher, but not just any teacher. You're a music teacher,
Yeah.
and your passion for music comes alive in the play. I think, yes, one of the reasons why everyone sings is because of the audience, but I think another reason why is because your passion for the music and to get everyone singing so clearly comes through. I wonder if you can reflect a little on the spirituality of music for you. What is it about music specifically? I know your dad was an organist and a music teacher too, but what specifically about music brings you and others closer to God?
I think there's, you know, when they say the zone, you're in the zone, like that level of creativity. Music is it for me. For others, it's writing. For others, it's sculpture or drawing or whatever it could be. But there's that zone where, like, I used to get headaches as a teenager, and I would sit and play the piano, and 20 minutes later, my headache would be gone. There's just something very healing about it. There's just something very divine about it. And one of the cool things about being a music teacher and then writing this play is that you kind of know how to draw things out of people, like just it's built into your lessons. And so we just wrote that into the script. And yeah, music is, and what's so nice about music is that the sound envelops everyone. You know, and a lot of times music is, like I say in my classroom, we're in music class, so we're going to do things together. We're going to do it together. You know, we'll do a rhythm chant with my first graders. I have to go write lessons after this. We're gonna, you know, but we're working on that, you know, and they're all in their own place. I said, no, listen, open your ears, and do it together. And, you know, that's its own form of communion as well.
So other than writing lesson plans this afternoon, what is next for Matthew LaBanca?
So the play was filmed, and I'm working with a lead producer on this. If we can capitalize the play, we will bring it on tour outside of the 5 boroughs. We would also bring the film on tour, and I would go for talkbacks to places where the idea of progressive change and social moving forward, that all of those things are not so easily felt. There's a wonderful movie out right now also called 1946. I don't know if you're familiar with it or if your viewers are, but it's also all about how the word homosexual never appeared in the Bible until in the English translation of the Bible until 1946. I highly encourage people to seek out the movie 1946. They went on tour all last summer to the southern half of the United States, played at different parishes, and went for talkbacks and had forums just like we're having today. So I envision communion as part of that future. We were invited by the Sisters of St. Joseph of Brentwood in this coming July. They're a very progressive Catholic convent. They're having their 375th anniversary of their founding in Kansas City this July. They lost a keynote speaker and they were looking for another one, and they said, hold the phone. We saw this piece in Off-Broadway. Bring Matthew down. They called me. They said, how would you like to do this for 1,000 or 2,000 people? I said, sign me up. So
The singing nuns. And
so yes, oh my gosh, they'll have a guitar in their back pocket, right? So there's opportunity here for further ministry, for further outreach. And and I'm still teaching, and I'm still auditioning as well. So staying open to all of it.
Matthew, thank you so much for sharing your story with us and for being with us this morning.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you all. Thank you. Oh, and come see Communion. We have 1 week left if you're interested to come see. It's at the Cell Theater on 23rd Street between 8th and 9th Avenues. And there are postcards here. And if you're online and want to check it out, I don't know if you have.
Yeah, I think the link has been posted in the chat, so you can check that out.
Okay.
Thank you again, Matthew. Thank you all for being here. We hope you'll stick around and join us for worship at 11 a.m. Next week at the Forum, we'll be welcoming the Reverend Margaret Rose. She works for the Episcopal Church, the wider denomination, and she's going to be talking about our ecumenical and interfaith partnerships as a denomination, how we reach out to other Christians and to people of other faiths. So hope we'll see you next week for that conversation then.
Thank you. Thank you.